I'd spent 26 years hiding behind the careful language of friendship. When Ashton asked what I was really thinking that night on his porch in Ann Arbor, something in me finally broke open. I told him the truth I'd buried since we were 19 and nothing would ever be the same. If this story moves you, please like, subscribe, and share. Your support means everything to me. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days when Ashton called me from Michigan. I was standing in my kitchen in Louisville, Kentucky, staring at the calendar on the wall and wondering how another year had slipped past without my notice. It was late October, and the leaves outside my apartment window had turned that particular shade of rust and gold that always made me think of college. "David," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice before he said another word. "I need a favor." I set down my coffee. "What kind of favor?" "The kind where you drive up here and help me paint my house before winter actually arrives," I laughed. "You're calling in a favor for manual labor?" "I'm calling in a favor for company," he said, and something in his tone shifted. "It's been a long year, Dave. I could use a friend." That stopped me. Ashton and I had been close since freshman year at Indiana University. But we drifted into the kind of friendship that survived on phone calls every few months and the occasional visit when schedules aligned. He'd moved to Ann Arbor 5 years ago for a job as a litigation research consultant, and I'd stayed in Louisville working as a freight coordination analyst for a regional shipping company. Our lives had gone in different directions, but the foundation had always felt solid. "When do you need me?" I asked. "This weekend. I know it's short notice." I glanced at the calendar again. I had nothing planned except the usual quiet routine I'd built for myself. "I'll be there Saturday morning." "You're the best," he said, and there was relief in his voice that I didn't fully understand. I hung up and stood there for a moment thinking about the last time I'd seen Ashton in person. It had been over a year, maybe closer to 2. We'd met halfway between our cities for lunch, talked for hours, and then driven back to our separate lives. I remembered feeling like I'd left something unsaid that day, but I'd pushed the thought away like I always did. The drive to Ann Arbor took me just over 5 hours. I left early Saturday morning and arrived around noon to find Ashton's house on a quiet street in the Burns Park neighborhood. It was a small Craftsman-style bungalow with a covered front porch and a yard full of oak trees. The paint was peeling on the shutters and the trim around the windows looked tired, but it had good bones. Ashton came out to meet me before I'd even turned off the engine. He looked the same as I remembered, tall and lean, with dark hair that was starting to gray at the temples and brown eyes that always seemed to be paying attention to something just beneath the surface. He wore an old flannel shirt and jeans, and when he smiled, I felt something familiar settle in my chest. "You made it," he said, pulling me into a hug. I said I would. We spent the afternoon scraping old paint and prepping the trim. Ashton had already bought the supplies, and we fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side without needing to fill every silence with conversation. It felt good to be doing something with my hands, something tangible and straightforward. By the time the sun started to set, we'd made decent progress. Ashton ordered pizza, and we sat on the porch steps eating and watching the neighborhood settle into evening. The air smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves. "So what's really going on?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He glanced at me. "What do you mean? You sounded different on the phone." "Like something was weighing on you." Ashton was quiet for a moment, turning his pizza slice in his hands. "I broke up with someone a few months ago." "It's been harder than I expected." I hadn't known he'd been seeing anyone. "I'm sorry, do you want to talk about it?" "Not really," he said, but then he kept going anyway. His name was Garrett. We were together for almost 2 years. I thought it was heading somewhere serious, but we wanted different things. He wanted to move to Chicago. I didn't want to leave this place. "So we ended it," I nodded, absorbing this. Ashton had come out to me during our junior year of college, and I'd been one of the first people he'd told. It had been a late-night conversation in my dorm room, both of us exhausted from studying for finals, and he'd said it quietly like he was testing the words. I'd told him it didn't change anything between us, and I'd meant it. But what I hadn't told him, what I'd never told him, was that I'd spent the previous 2 years trying to understand my own feelings, my own silence. I'd dated women in college, and it had always felt like I was performing a role I didn't quite fit. It wasn't until after graduation that I'd started to admit to myself that I was attracted to men. I'd had a few quiet relationships over the years, nothing that lasted, nothing I'd talked about much. I'd told my parents eventually, and they'd been supportive in their reserved way, but I'd never quite shaken the feeling that I was catching up to something everyone else had figured out earlier. And I'd never told Ashton, not because I thought he'd judge me, but because telling him would mean admitting something I'd buried so deeply I wasn't sure I could ever dig it out. "What about you?" Ashton asked, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Anyone special in your life?" "No," I said, "not right now." He looked at me with that same attentive expression I'd known for years. "You always say that, because it's always true." "David," he said, and there was something careful in his voice, "you know you can talk to me, right? About anything." I met his eyes and felt the weight of all the things I'd never said pressing against my ribs. "I know." We finished eating and cleaned up, and then Ashton suggested we take a walk through the neighborhood. The evening had turned cool, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional sound of someone raking leaves or closing a garage door. We walked without a destination, just moving through the pools of light from the street lamps. "I've been thinking a lot about college lately," Ashton said, "about how simple things felt back then. Like we had all the time in the world to figure things out." "We were kids," I said. "Yeah, but we were happy kids." "At least I was." I thought about those years, the late nights in the library, the terrible dining hall food, the parties we'd gone to and left early because we'd rather be talking to each other. Ashton had been my best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone, and I'd been in love with him the entire time without ever letting myself acknowledge it. "I was happy too," I said. We circled back to his house and Ashton invited me inside. The interior was warm and lived in, with bookshelves lining the walls and mismatched furniture that somehow fit together. He poured us each a glass of wine and we settled on the couch. "Can I ask you something?" he said after a while. "Sure. Do you ever feel like you're waiting for your life to start? Like you're doing all the right things but something's missing?" I looked at him, at the way the lamplight caught the lines around his eyes, and I felt the question land somewhere deep. "Yeah. I feel like that a lot." "What do you think it is?" he asked. "The missing piece?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't know how. Ashton leaned back against the couch, his shoulder almost touching mine. "I think for me it's connection, real connection. I thought I had it with Garrett, but looking back, I'm not sure we ever really saw each other, not the way I wanted to be seen." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean I want someone who knows me. Not the version I show the world, but the actual me. The messy, uncertain, still figuring it out me." He paused. "Does that make sense?" "It does." He turned to look at me, and for a moment the air between us felt different, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. "You've always known me, Dave." "Better than most people." I swallowed hard. "You've known me too." "Have I?" he asked, and there was something searching in his expression. "Sometimes I feel like there's a part of you I can't reach, like you're holding something back." My heart was beating too fast. "Ashton, I'm not trying to push," he said quickly. "I just want you to know that whatever it is, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." I nodded, unable to speak. We sat there in the quiet for a long time, and then Ashton stood and stretched. "I should let you get some sleep. You're in the guest room upstairs, bathrooms at the end of the hall." "Thanks," I managed. I lay awake that night in the unfamiliar room, staring at the ceiling and replaying the conversation over and over. I thought about all the years I'd spent keeping my distance, protecting myself from the possibility of losing him. I thought about the careful way I'd constructed my life, always leaving room for him but never letting him get too close. And I wondered what would happen if I finally told him the truth. Sunday morning, I woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Ashton moving around downstairs. I dressed and found him in the kitchen, flipping pancakes at the stove. He smiled when he saw me. "I figured you'd be hungry," he said. We ate breakfast on the porch and then spent the rest of the morning painting. The weather had cleared overnight and the air was crisp and bright. We worked in comfortable silence, and by early afternoon the trim on the front of the house looked transformed. "This was a good idea," I said, stepping back to admire our work. "I'm glad you came," Ashton said. "I didn't realize how much I needed this until you got here." We cleaned the brushes and put away the supplies, and then Ashton suggested we drive out to Gallup Park and walk along the Huron River. The park was busy with families and couples enjoying the autumn afternoon, and we followed the paved trail that wound along the water. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since Garrett and I broke up," Ashton said as we walked, "about what I actually want. Not what I think I'm supposed to want, but what would make me happy." "And what's that?" I asked. "Honestly, I don't know yet, but I think it starts with being more honest. With myself and with the people I care about." I felt the words settle between us, and I knew he was offering me an opening. I could feel the weight of it, the opportunity to finally say what I'd been carrying all these years. But I didn't take it, not yet. We walked for another hour and then drove back to his house. Ashton suggested we grab dinner at a restaurant on Main Street, and we spent the evening at a small Italian place that felt warm and unpretentious. We talked about work and family and all the safe topics we'd always used to fill the space between us. By the time we got back to his house, it was late. Ashton made tea and we sat on the porch despite the chill in the air. The street was quiet and the sky was clear enough to see a few stars. "David," Ashton said after a while, "can I ask you something personal?" "Okay, are you happy?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know. I think I'm content." "That's not the same thing." "No," I admitted, "it's not." He looked at me and I could see he was choosing his words carefully. "I've known you for a long time and I've watched you build this very careful life. You have a good job, a nice apartment, a routine that works, but I've never seen you let yourself want something. Really want it?" I felt my chest tighten. "What makes you think I don't?" "Because I know you," he said gently. "And I think you're afraid of what might happen if you let yourself be vulnerable." He was right and we both knew it. "What about you?" I asked, deflecting. "Are you happy?" "I'm working on it," he said. "That's why I wanted you here. I needed to be around someone who's known me long enough to call me on my own patterns." "And what patterns are those?" "Settling," he said. "Choosing people who are safe instead of people who challenge me. People I can keep at a distance instead of people who might actually see me." I didn't know what to say to that. Ashton turned to face me and the expression on his face was more open than I'd ever seen it. "You asked me yesterday what was really going on. The truth is, I've been lonely. Not just because Garrett and I broke up, but because I've been lonely for a long time, even when I was with him." "I'm sorry," I said. "Don't be, it's not your fault." He paused. "But I do want to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." My heart was pounding. "Okay, what are you thinking right now, right this moment?" Not the polite answer, not the safe answer. "What are you actually thinking?" And there it was, the question I'd been avoiding for 26 years. I looked at him, at the way the porch light caught his face, and I felt everything I'd been holding back rise to the surface. I could feel the careful walls I'd built starting to crack, and I knew that if I answered him honestly, there would be no going back. "I'm thinking," I said slowly, "that I've spent half my life lying to you." Ashton went very still. "What do you mean?" I took a breath and let it out. "I'm thinking that I've been in love with you since we were 19 years old, and I never told you because I was terrified of losing you. I'm thinking that every time you've called me over the years to tell me about someone you were dating, it felt like something breaking inside me. And I'm thinking that I came here this weekend because I can't stay away from you, even though being close to you is the hardest thing I've ever done." The silence that followed felt endless. Ashton was staring at me, and I couldn't read the expression on his face. I felt exposed and raw, and part of me wanted to take it all back, to find a way to smooth it over and return to the safety of what we'd always been. But I didn't. I sat there and waited. "David," he finally said, and his voice was shaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't know how, because I was scared. Because I thought if I said it out loud, I'd lose the only thing that mattered to me." "You wouldn't have lost me," he said. "I didn't know that." He stood up abruptly and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to me. I watched him, my heart in my throat, and I had no idea what he was thinking. "Do you have any idea," he said after a long moment, "how many times I've wondered if you felt the same way?" I went very still. "What?" He turned to face me and there were tears in his eyes. "I've been in love with you since junior year, David, maybe longer. I came out to you because I needed you to know who I really was, and part of me was hoping, God, I don't know what I was hoping. That you'd say something, that you'd give me some sign." I couldn't breathe. "You never said anything either, because you were dating women. Because I thought I was reading into something that wasn't there, because I was a coward." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "And then years went by and it felt too late. So I tried to move on. I dated other people and I told myself it was enough, but it never was." I stood and crossed the porch to where he was standing. "Ashton, I need you to understand something," he said, his voice breaking. "Every relationship I've ever had has been me trying to find what I already had with you. And none of them came close." I reached for his hand and he let me take it. His fingers were cold and I could feel them trembling. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." "I'm sorry too." We stood there in the cold, holding onto each other like we were afraid to let go. And then Ashton pulled me into a hug, and I felt something inside me finally break open. I wrapped my arms around him and held on, and for the first time in 26 years I let myself feel all of it. The love, the longing, the grief for all the time we'd lost. "What do we do now?" I asked when we finally pulled apart. Ashton looked at me and there was something fragile and hopeful in his expression. "I don't know. But I don't want to go back to pretending." "Neither do I." We went inside and sat on the couch, closer this time, and we talked until the early hours of the morning. We talked about college and all the moments we'd both misread. We talked about the years we'd spent apart and the relationships we'd tried to build with other people. We talked about fear and loneliness and the way we'd both convinced ourselves that safety was the same as happiness. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Ashton reached for my hand again and I laced my fingers through his. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "I've never let myself have this before." "Neither have I," he said, "not really. Not with someone who actually matters. You matter to me more than anyone." He leaned his head against my shoulder and I felt the weight of him, solid and real. "We'll figure it out," he said. "We've got time now." I wanted to believe him. I ended up staying in Ann Arbor for another week. I called my boss on Monday morning and used some vacation time I'd been saving, and Ashton rearranged his schedule so we could spend the days together. We finished painting his house and we cooked meals in his kitchen and we took long walks through the neighborhoods around Burns Park. We didn't rush anything. We were both too aware of how fragile this was, how easy it would be to let old patterns pull us back into silence. But we kept talking, kept showing each other the parts of ourselves we'd always kept hidden. One evening, we were sitting on his couch and Ashton asked me what I wanted this to be. "I want it to be real," I said. "I don't want to keep pretending we're just friends when we both know it's more than that." "I want that too," he said, "but I need to know you're ready for this. Because I can't do halfway, Dave, not with you." I looked at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes, and I felt something settle in my chest. "I'm ready. I'm scared, but I'm ready." He kissed me then, and it felt like coming home. We spent the rest of the week figuring out what a relationship between us might actually look like. I lived in Louisville and he lived in Ann Arbor, and neither of us was in a position to move right away. But we both agreed that we'd make it work. We'd visit each other as often as we could, and we'd keep talking, keep building something real. When I finally drove back to Louisville, it felt different than it ever had before. I wasn't leaving him behind. I was just going home with the knowledge that we were finally on the same page. Over the next few months, we fell into a rhythm. I drove to Ann Arbor every other weekend, and Ashton came to Louisville on the weekends in between. We talked on the phone every night and we sent each other messages throughout the day, small things, mundane things, the kind of things you share with someone who's part of your daily life. It wasn't always easy. The distance was hard and there were nights when I lay in bed wishing he was there beside me. But it was also the most honest I'd ever been with another person, and that made it worth it. In February, Ashton told me that his company was opening a new office in Indianapolis, and they'd offered him a position there. It would be a lateral move, but it would cut the distance between us in half. "I want to take it," he said over the phone, "but I need to know you're okay with it. I don't want you to feel like I'm putting pressure on you." "I'm more than okay with it," I said. "I want you closer." He moved to Indianapolis in April, and I helped him pack up his house in Ann Arbor and load the truck. We drove the boxes and furniture to his new apartment on a Saturday, and then spent the next few days unpacking and setting up his new space. Indianapolis felt like neutral ground, a place that belonged to both of us instead of just one. And with only an hour and a half between us now, we could see each other during the week, not just on weekends. By summer, we were talking about what it might look like to live together. We hadn't made any firm decisions yet, but the conversation felt natural, inevitable. We'd both spent so many years keeping our lives separate, and now we were learning how to build something together. One evening in late June, we were sitting on the balcony of Ashton's apartment, watching the sun set over the city. We just finished dinner and we were drinking wine and talking about nothing in particular. "Do you ever regret it?" Ashton asked. "Waiting so long to tell me," I thought about it. "I regret the time we lost, but I don't regret where we are now." "Me neither," he said. "I think we both needed to grow into this. To figure out who we were on our own before we could figure out who we are together." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm glad we finally got here." He reached for my hand and I took it. "Me too." In August, I got a job offer from a logistics firm in Indianapolis. It was a step up from my current position and it came with a significant raise, but more than that, it felt like a sign. I gave my notice in Louisville and started looking for an apartment in Indianapolis. Ashton and I talked about moving in together, but we both agreed it was too soon. We wanted to take our time to make sure we were building something that would last, so I found a place a few blocks from his apartment and I moved in September. Living in the same city changed everything. We could have dinner together on weeknights and we could wake up together on weekends. We could build a routine that included both of us, and we could start to imagine a future that felt real and tangible. One Saturday in October, almost a year after that first weekend in Ann Arbor, we drove out to Brown County State Park and hiked one of the trails that wound through the hills. The leaves were at their peak and the forest was a riot of red and gold. We stopped at an overlook and stood there looking out at the valley below. The air was cool and the sky was clear and everything felt quiet and still. "I've been thinking," Ashton said, "about what you said that night on the porch. About how you'd been in love with me for 26 years. Yeah, I've been in love with you just as long, maybe longer. And I don't want to waste any more time." He turned to face me and there was something serious in his expression. "I know we said we'd take things slow and I don't want to rush you. But I need you to know that this is it for me, you're it for me, and when you're ready, I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just something we're trying out." I felt my throat tighten. "I want that too, yeah. He pulled me into a kiss and I felt the weight of all those years finally lift. We stood there on the overlook holding each other and I thought about how long it had taken us to get here. All the missed chances, all the things we'd left unsaid, but we were here now. And that was what mattered. By the time winter came, we decided to move in together. We found a house in the broad Ripple neighborhood, a small bungalow with a front porch and a yard full of trees. It reminded me of Ashton's place in Ann Arbor, and it felt like the right place to start this next chapter. We moved in just before Thanksgiving, and we spent the holiday cooking together in our new kitchen and making plans for the future. Ashton's parents came to visit and so did mine, and it felt good to have everyone in one place to introduce them to the life we were building. On Christmas Eve, Ashton and I sat on the porch, bundled up in blankets and drinking hot cider. The neighborhood was quiet and the streetlights cast a soft glow on the snow that had fallen earlier in the day. "I've been thinking about that question you asked me last year," I said. "About whether I'm happy, and," Ashton asked, I am, I said. For the first time in a long time, I actually am. He smiled and leaned his head on my shoulder. Me too. We sat there in the quiet and I thought about everything it had taken to get here. The fear, the silence, the years of holding back. And I thought about what it felt like to finally let go, to finally let myself be seen. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. David, Ashton said after a while, "What are you thinking?" I smiled. "I'm thinking that I love you. And I'm thinking that I should have told you that a long time ago." "You're telling me now," he said. "That's what matters." He was right. We couldn't change the past, but we could choose how we moved forward. And we were choosing each other every day in all the small and ordinary ways that added up to a life. I looked out at the quiet street, at the snow and the lights and the stillness of the evening, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not the fragile, temporary kind, but the deep, steady kind that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be. "Merry Christmas," I said. "Merry Christmas, Dave." We stayed on the porch until the cold drove us inside, and then we made tea and sat by the fireplace, talking and laughing and planning for the year ahead. And for the first time in 26 years, I wasn't holding anything back. I was finally home.